I'm really a guy who lives out in the woods. Don't have any of those special fancy titles. But I am a father, and I want my children to live in a Christian nation. And I want my children to live in a Christian nation.
Welcome back to the Lone Bulwark. Today, Thomas and I are going to continue our series on the virtues and the emotions that have been discussed for thousands of years. And today we're going to talk about envy and emulation. Let me start over. I'll do that again. Okay. Welcome back to the Lone Bulwark. Thanks for joining us. Today, Thomas is back. And we are continuing our series on the virtues and the emotions that have been discussed for thousands of years, since Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and all the way to the present. And here we are talking about them. We've talked about, we've talked about courage, and we've talked about, what was the other one? Empathy. And now today we're talking about envy and emulation. Envy and emulation. So this is actually discussed side by side in Aristotle's rhetoric, and they're kind of similar in a way. And so we thought it would be good to talk about these things. It's been the talk of envy has been around in the Christian circles, and so this would be a good topic to discuss in detail, and the various ways that envy is bad and also misapplied or misattributed to people. I think so. When we start with this discussion, just to kind of kick it off. So Thomas is here. There he is. So when we start this discussion, all of these terms, all of these things, they're fundamentally, they begin with you relating to someone else. So there's some relationship between you and someone else. And as Aristotle defines it, there's some kind of pain involved. Someone else achieves something or has something or does something. And it's in some sense, it's good. Now, it could be that they achieved this thing or got this thing through injustice, or perhaps it's justice, whatever it is. But fundamentally, you experience an element of pain. That's the word that is often translated from Aristotle and elsewhere. You experience a pain, and then you respond to that in some way. And that can be through envy, or that can be through emulation. It can be through indignation as well. And so these things depend upon some conditions. So envy is one of those things where you have a pain, someone achieves something, has something, whatever it is. And in a way you want that thing, but you experience a form of bitterness toward that person. In some cases, you may want to destroy or eliminate that good from that person because of your envy. Now, that person could have achieved that through injustice or justice. It doesn't really matter. But you have a sense of bitterness towards that person. What's interesting is that Plutarch, when he discusses envy, he says that it's actually a form of self-hatred, right? Because if you wanted to achieve that same thing, you could just emulate that person to achieve it. So he also says that, you could act to hate that person and seek to destroy that other person. But he mentions like relatives, where you actually don't really want to harm your relative for various reasons. And so really fundamentally envy is a type of self-hatred. You actually hate yourself. It's like redirecting that success back to you, and you realizing you don't have it. So envy is actually a type of self-hatred. So that's that. Emulation, of course, is someone has something and you emulate that person to achieve that as well. So that's typically considered a type of virtue or a good thing to do. And then the last thing I'll say is you have indignation, which is someone has done something. The little cat is making noise in the background. I don't know if you can hear that. but indignation is where someone achieves something, and you consider that to be unjust. So you're not going to emulate that person because you think it is bad. But it's kind of like envy in a way, in the sense that you think that person should not have what he has, and perhaps even that you should have it. And so indignation, let's just say it's righteous indignation, which, might be redundant. But that means that person should not have what he has. And so you may act to eliminate it. So anyway, that's kind of framing the discussion. of those various terms. And I'll just kick it off to Thomas to continue on there.
Yeah, so this topic has come up in Christian circles, as you said, Stephen, and it's something that's often leveled at Christians because it's something that nobody ever wants to be said to have. No one ever tries to justify their envy and say, well, I am envious, but no, it's always you want to say, I'm not envious. I'm actually something else. So we all recognize that this is a vice. This is something you don't want to have. And in fact, Plutarch and Aristotle both talk about hatred and indignation, as Stephen was mentioning, and how sometimes these things are necessary. They're good. God hates the evil. He hates evil. He hates the wicked. He's angry with the wicked every day, the Bible says. And this is something that's okay in some circumstances, or at least for some people or some beings. And the same thing with indignation. Indignation can be righteous. And so even jealousy, I think somewhere, I forget, I'm mixing the two now. I forget who mentioned jealousy. Was it Plutarch or Aristotle? Jealousy also can be something that's okay sometimes. God is jealous. The Bible says God is jealous. He's jealous for his glory. He's jealous for his people. And so that's okay sometimes. If somebody says, oh, you're just jealous. Well, sometimes you say, no, I'm not jealous. No, that's not. Sometimes, no, it's okay. But envy, it's never okay. Nobody ever says, yeah, I'm envious, but it's for a good cause. No, it's never for a good cause. It's always something bad. So when people accuse each other of being envious, this is something I think we should look into more carefully. And we shouldn't allow broad sweeping accusations of envy go without some scrutiny. This is just fair, right? If I say that you are a murderer, if I accuse you of being a murderer or something, you're going to want to hear some facts brought up to prove this, right? You're not just going to allow me to kind of psychoanalyze you and say, well, I can perceive into your soul deeper than you yourself can perceive. And from my superior position of being very important or in charge of things, I'm going to just pronounce upon you my judgment. And not just you, but like large swaths of people today. Oh, you're just filled with hatred, all of you people. And this is often what happens. Young men today on the right or wherever are accused of harboring misogyny or bad ideas of this and that, and you're full of hatred and envy or bitterness. And there's really no attempt to actually look into the hearts of these people, much less even talk with them. And even if we could look into the hearts of people, I mean, I don't think we can do that, right? This is sort of like a Freudian psychoanalysis that didn't really exist prior to that time period, where now it's popular not to deal with the arguments of your opponent, but merely to psychoanalyze them with some mental, moral, spiritual pathology, right? I don't have to argue with you if I can just say, well, you're full of envy, right? You're filled with bitterness and rage. And I'm not going to take your ideas seriously because you are unwell. Do you see? You are dangerous. You are an extremist. You're a radical. You're a loony. And that's kind of how I think people look at the accusations of, or at least how we should address this situation. So when Stephen's talking about there's indignation, there's emulation, there's hatred, there's jealousy, there's envy. Notice how nuanced the discussion gets suddenly. Yeah, we're being nuanced bros here, sorry. But that's how the Christian Western philosophical and theological traditions discuss virtues and vices. We have to become particular when we're dividing the soul. This isn't like, it's like doing brain surgery with a sledgehammer when you just come in and say, oh, you're all just full of this. Like, okay, sure, you're gonna harm a lot of people here with that blunt analysis. So Aristotle and Plutarch are not the only people to talk about envy, but they are some of the first to really assess and weigh this. And so when you reach back into the virtues and want to study this tradition, you can grab a book on envy today. I'm sure it would be nice and good. Or you can just go back to the fount. What's the Latin phrase? Ad fontes. Ad fontes, to the fountains, to the source, to the sources. And that's what we're doing here. Envy, as Stephen said, is something where you see someone else's good fortune and you are pained by it. You feel pain in your heart. When someone has something good befall them, maybe you can like just stop and think for a second. Has that ever happened to you? I don't know. It's hard to admit it. I'll be honest with you, because when I do see it in me, I'm like, nah, that wasn't envy. No, I was not envious at that person. He just didn't deserve it. Right?
Well, hey, everybody, consider this your official invite to join us here in Ogden, Utah for our annual New Christendom Press Conference this June 12th to the 14th. We're going to be having a great time, lots of great speakers, live episode of the King's Hall, live episode of Haunted Cosmos. I'll be putting on a concert, a singles mixer, a pastor's breakfast, a business mixer, a VIP hangout. We've got it all, and you need to go to newchristendompress.com/2025, link in the description, to get tickets and more information. We hope to see you there. What are you waiting for? Real strength starts with honoring God's creation. Mount Athos Performance crafts pure, nutrient-dense products from their family farm to your home using goat milk protein and mineral-rich ingredients without chemicals or shortcuts. Every formula reflects their commitment to faith, purity, and strength. Fuel your pursuit of excellence and get 20% off your order at athosperform.com when you use code NCP20. Summer's Pet Treats makes all-natural dog treats using high-quality, human-grade ingredients.
Every ingredient is carefully selected for a specific nutritional value, which means they're healthy.
Ben, are you eating the treat?
Yeah, dude, I got that dog in me.
I don't think that's what they meant by human-grade ingredients, but hey, if you want to support a Christian-owned business that believes in the Dominion mandate, then go pick up some healthy dog treats at summerspetTreats.com.
And use code NCP10 at checkout. That's summerspetTreats.com and use code NCP10.
Get that dog in you.
Did you know that 60% of Americans will avoid your business if you have an unattractive logo, even if you have good reviews? Seriously, it's true. This podcast is sponsored by Resurrection Design Co., and they're on a mission to help churches and Christian businesses like yours flourish for the kingdom of Christ and the glory of God through bold and beautiful branding. If you want them to design your website for free, be the first listener of this podcast to sign up for a brand identity package before the last day of this month. Just visit resurrectiondesign.co/bulwark.
I think there's a difference between actually meriting something and then good fortune falling you. Like, if I worked hard and gained something by my work and it's due me, like honestly, legitimately, then we don't really envy those people. Like, I remember when I was young, I used to love Jimmy Page, the guitarist for Led Zeppelin. And he was just so good at the guitar and amazing. And I never envied him, though. Excuse me. I never thought, man, I'm hurt that he's so good, or that's not right, and I should be in that position. And no, it's actually, I looked at that and thought, this guy has played the guitar so intensely for so long. He's become an amazing guitarist, and I admire that, and it inspires me to try to do the same. Now, of course, I mean, it's like delusions of grandeur that I'm going to be Jimmy Page, right? But that was the mentality. And many people have that mentality of, you see someone who has achieved something great and you admire, you respect, and you want to emulate that person. That's different than someone who circumstances have moved or fortune has befallen them and they're being elevated, and it feels like they don't deserve that, and perhaps I do. And here's something interesting, Stephen. I don't know if you picked this up in your reading, but envy almost always has to arise among peers or near peers. Like, I deserve what that person deserves, but that person rose higher and I didn't. So like, if Donald Trump, for instance, his children are extremely wealthy, right? Because their dad was wealthy. I mean, that's why. Now, they've all worked hard, yeah, but Donald Trump was wealthy and his children were born into that wealth and they're extremely wealthy. I don't look at the Trump children and think, man, I'm pained by their wealth. I deserve that wealth. I should have it. I'm going to try to do something to harm them and tear them down and destroy their wealth. No, because they're already born far beyond, like we're not peers. Okay. But to give an example of envy, I think this is the best example I can give. It's in the book Count of Monte Cristo. The Count of Monte Cristo, the main character is his name is Edmond Dantes, and he is like 19 years old. And he's on a ship. He's a sailor, but he's like one of the like mid crew. He's not like the lead guy. And there's another man on board. His name is Danglars. And Danglars is also a sailor, but he is he's a little nobler in his birth. And whenever they land on shore, the captain is dead, and Monsieur Morel, the owner of the ship, elevates Edmond Dantes to be the captain of the Pharaon. And this is an elevation, not just in like today it would be like, oh, I'm just going to get paid more and I'm going to get to drive the ship. But back then it was a status also. So Edmond Dantes, his status was raised above Danglars. In fact, Danglars was a little bit above him by birth. But Edmond Dantes is just fortune befalls him and he rises up. Also, Mercedes, the Catalan young lady, loved Edmond Dantes and not Danglars. And so he has the love of Mercedes, he has the favor of Monsieur Morel, he's now captain of the Pharaon, and he's only 19 years old or something like this. Fortunes are just befalling him, and Danglars and another guy named Caderousse, and then I think it was Fernand Mondego. These three guys conspire together to destroy Edmond Dantes. And there's a scene where they're all sitting at a cafe and they're drinking wine and they're just talking and they're all commiserating their mutual bitterness at Edmond. And they're envious. Envy is just dripping from the pages as you read this scene. And they develop a conspiracy to destroy Edmond Dantes. And it's motivated by nothing except envy at this guy. And of course they hate him too and they're jealous, but envy is the more precise thing here. And so they act, because of envy, they act to destroy him. That's a perfect depiction here. They see him rise and they all go drink alcohol and just kind of, they're like, you could see the pain in their hearts. They're pained by this man's good fortune. He doesn't deserve it. Each one of us, like one man wants Mercedes, one man wants the nobility, one man wants the captain to be captain, and they all conspire against him to do something. That's envy. That's a perfect depiction of envy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, there is that bitterness within envy. And this is something that, like people in the academic world feel this. You go to like an academic conference, like a philosophy conference in particular, and some guy makes an argument and you just feel like the crowd is stirring to destroy this guy. It's like there is this, there's such like a sort of status envy within the academic world that you get a lot of very unfriendly behavior. Not so much in Christian conferences, unless I'm there, but I've experienced a few lashing outs. But anyway, you find this all over there. So envy is a real thing. As much as we're going to criticize the use of it. It's a real thing. It's easy for people. I think you're absolutely right. In fact, I was going to say that it's kind of among peers. I think we can look at someone who's far above us in something and also achieve something that we may not be particularly interested in actually doing. So like someone who's a great guitarist or someone or whatever, like that, like I don't have any interest in playing a guitar, but I can appreciate someone and respect them for their achievement in that. And so there's not really emulation, but there's also not envy. But if I was a aspiring guitarist or I had a little bit of a following and this other guy had this huge album that came out, I can understand that there would be some bitterness involved with that. And it's actually, again, it's a type of self-hatred, because if that person actually did do something profound and you don't particularly like that person or you just trust them or something like that, and they get all this attention, then inside you, you're in a way trying to conceal your own self-hatred through your bitterness for that other person, right? So you want what that guy achieved. In some ways, you realize that you couldn't have achieved that, or perhaps you should have pursued that and achieved that. And so you redirect it. I mean, it's really about yourself, but you direct that bitterness towards someone else in order to, in a way, satisfy or to conceal in your own mind your own self-hatred. It is absolutely is a real thing. It's something we all ought to avoid, of course. And I will say, though, that the way, and you hinted upon this, that there is that tendency within the rhetorical sphere to see that anyone who has sort of negative emotions towards another person or another group, that therefore that is just envy. And so you cast it out as you pathologize, you psychologize the other person and say that's envious. So someone might, with the emotion of anger or indignation, say, hey, this group is doing something, or this person is doing something that is evil, that is wrong, that they are, in a way uniquely pernicious towards this or that or society. And so you state the reasons for it, and you do it with a sort of, as I said, a type of emotion. And we talked about this on our show on anger. That's what I forgot to mention, that we did a show on anger for Ars Politica, that there is actually a sort of righteous anger toward injustice. In fact, if you don't have, if within you does not arise a certain anger or an emotion towards some injustice that actually involves you in some capacity. I mean, if you're always mad about something that happened thousands of miles from here, then you might be mentally captured. But if it's actually occurring in ways that directly concern you or the people you love, or have some affection for, then you ought to actually have some emotion in relation to it. If you don't, then you actually have a sort of weak soul in that regard. But anyway, so if that is the case and you are seeing some sort of injustice and then you react negatively with emotion towards that, and you state this is why it's unjust, and then the other person says, you're just envious. It's just envy. That's it. It's obviously it's false. We would call it actually a form of lying. It's unprincipled rhetoric. In fact, you should deal with the other person's argument. You should say, actually, no, it's not unjust, instead of going straight to the envy card. But that has been very common. That has been very common. And I think it's because they are, anger, or like a sort of righteous anger and envy, they do exhibit similar emotions. Like it rises, as we said, originally from a pain from what someone else has done or has. And then there's some sort of anger, some sort of stirring of the soul against that. And then you have a type of pathos that can look very much like envy. This is why the rhetoric actually works. This is why someone can do that and say that. And if this person has a if the person making the accusation has a certain rapport with people, or these people need some line, they need some sort of rhetorical tool to beat down these other people who are emotional in some ways, well, it just cast it on envy. It doesn't require a lot of thought. You don't have to look at the substance of the argument. You don't have to actually think through anything rationally.
Yeah.
You don't have to refute. You just bulverize and pathologize and go from there. So that being said, of course, there is actually envy. I mean, Scripture speaks of envy repeatedly. It is a real thing. We've all experienced it. It's easy to get trapped into it, and we shouldn't do it. At the same time, if someone accuses you of envy without dealing with the substance of the argument, don't get tricked. Don't get tricked by it. I understand it as a rhetorical tool. I get that as a strategy. But in the end, it's unprincipled.
Hey, as you were talking, Stephen, I thought of an example of envy from the Bible, which actually flips things on the head of what's being discussed in some Christian circles today. So the parable of the prodigal son. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but there's two children. I think it's the younger son. I can't remember. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's the younger son who goes off. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. He goes off. He squanders his inheritance, and he comes back, and his dad embraces him and slaughters the fattened calf and throws a celebration and all this stuff. The older son is upset. He's pained because of the gracious treatment to the younger son. And Jesus here, if I understand correctly, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, Jesus here is saying there's the firstborn who's envious of the secondborn. Who is the firstborn? I mean, what is this a parable about? Who is he talking about? And clearly, I think he's talking about certain people who were considered the firstborn, like the primary inheritance people, and then these others who are receiving grace and acceptance. And then the firstborn is envious of that, and he's pained. And his father has to come talk to him and say, "Hey, am I not in the right here to welcome and love my son?" And so anyway, that's an example of envy in the Bible, and there are many others in movies, as you were talking about, Stephen. The academic world full of envy. In some cases, I was thinking about the movie Good Will Hunting, where Will is brought in. He's a janitor. He's a genius, though. And he's brought in to do math with one of the professors. And all of the other guys who clearly spent their careers trying to move themselves in academia up to assistant professor, the lead professor in mathematics, and get the grants and the scholarships and the publishing contracts. And they're just climbing Will just shoots right through all of that and comes and takes first place as the professor emeritus's sidekick, or his favorite. And you can see that these other guys in the movie are envious of Will, and Will doesn't care at all about the value of academia. He's just some roughneck guy who is foul-mouthed and whatever. But they're envious. And another comment here I think is very important. Envy. So let me put it this differently. An egalitarian society where everyone is equal is a breeding ground for envy, more so than a hierarchical society. Okay, liberalism will tell you that if we're all equal, we're all alike. And if we're all alike, we'll all be friends. Because there's no haves and there's no have-nots. There's no propertied classes and propertyless classes. There's no rich and there's no poor. We're all together. We'll all be friends. Whereas in reality, hierarchy produces bonds among people. And specifically, the vice of envy breeds among those who are of near or the similar class. There breeds among peers. Again, as you said, Stephen, and as I said, but other examples, like I remember growing up watching Michael Jordan play basketball, and I was just amazed by his abilities to do all kinds of things on the court. And I often, when I was young, and I didn't know much, and I thought, I want to be able to do that. That's amazing. I never thought, he doesn't deserve that. He's just, I never got envious because he's older than me, first of all. And he's very tall, he's athletic, and he's practiced way more than I've ever practiced basketball. Like, I never put in the time. Of course, again, I'm not just physically made for it, but I'm not envious because he and I are beyond being peers. Like, he's far beyond me. But if we were peers, if I was in academia, for instance, or something, and for no reason, or maybe because that guy's dad is the president or something, or just fortunate circumstances befall my peer, and he just rises above me, there's the envy can occur there. So when we're equal, and I would argue that when you have an egalitarian society, envy can breed more because you're all told you're the same. You're all told that you have the same skills, the same opportunities, the same moral and mental and all kinds of characteristic attributes we're all the same, perfectly the same. Therefore, if any one of us rises above the other, envy. Why does he get to have a brand new car and not me? Why does he get to have a bigger house than I do? He doesn't deserve that second vacation. We all deserve a second vacation. It's a human right to have 2 vacations a year. And before you know it, we begin to say things like this in our hearts because, well, we're all equal, right? Yeah. But if you have the mentality that we're not equal, And there are some people who are above us and below us and to the side of us or just completely unlike us. Then when others have more or have less, or the fortune befalls them in one way or the other, envy doesn't grow as much or as readily in that environment. So I think that, for instance, with some accusations of envy today, that certain classes of people are envious of other classes of people, you're really comparing apples to oranges. These are not peer classes, first of all. They're completely different classes of people. And also, we shouldn't be attributing envy to large classes of people to begin with. Envy is a specific condition of one person. You don't want to attribute vices just to broad. I mean, look, I know St. Paul does this. All Cretans are liars, right? And that may be true, or it may have been true long ago. But we should be careful when saying that, because we're being very specific here when it comes to virtues and vices. We want people to do that to us, and we should do that to them. And we should have evidence for that. I think, Stephen, as you were mentioning, some people accuse others of envy as a means to not deal with the evidence. So I can just say that you're full of envy, as the Bible says, right? As the good book says, and then that's said and done. We don't have to actually look at the evidence, because if I did, I'd have to suddenly be weighing evidence that may disagree with me, and I may have to broach subjects that are uncomfortable for me to discuss, and it would harm my influence or my optics or whatever that might be.
Yeah, I do think you can talk about envy in some mass movements, and I think there's a reason why communism arose in the 19th century. I mean, as liberalism was expanding throughout Europe, you have, like you said, the promise of equality. Everyone's equal, and then you now are in the city looking around, and you're a worker working 12 hours a day, seeing all these rich guys. And then someone comes along and says, actually, no, you're all equal, and they're exploiting you. And the reason they do that is because they're exploiting your labor power, and surplus labor is all that. It's actually yours, by the way. And so I think there's a difference there. So when you confront a Marxist theorist, you'd have to deal with the arguments themselves. Like, is it true that there is this thing called surplus labor, and that they take off the top and it's actually yours? And there's labor value, and actually everything you see the rich as they pass by in their carriage or their fancy cars, all of that is an embodiment of your labor, which is yours, and they're exploiting it. Now, the labor theory of value is basically destroyed in economics, but that's because of argumentation. So I think you have to deal with the substance of that. The difference, though, is I do think there's an element in some mass movements where if you just analyze the rhetoric itself, it is essentially stirring up a level of envy. And you can see this in many of the social movements you have today, because I think at the mass level, I just don't expect rationality. I know that's elitist and all that. So there is something to that. I can see what you're saying.
I can see what you're saying with the Marxists and even socialists, because it's equality is embedded into their philosophy, into the society. And so it's going to be a breeding ground for envy. In fact, envy is baked into their economic equations. Yeah. It's like the philosophy of their economics and their politics is based upon envy. I mean, that's what it is.
Right.
And you have the haves and the have-nots, and we should take from them and give to everybody. I mean, that's straight up envy in politics. So I think it is, in that sense, okay to accuse that of envy. I think also at the same time, we should probably, like the normal people, not the crazy radical socialist communists, but the people who are living under communism, I think, at least this is a personal approach here, I would be more willing to show them pity and a little bit of understanding that, hey, you may be more prone to envy because you have been raised in an envious environment. Yeah. And so it doesn't mean it's okay. It just means I'm not going to be like, you're envious, you loser, you sinful person. It's like, hey, you were raised in this environment and taught to think things, and you need to be brought out of that. But there's some compassion there, whereas if there's just some really deluded person who's a zealot who's leading the socialist movement, that person's more culpable, in my opinion, because they're the ones propagating the idea. Yeah,
this does get complicated because, to be consistent, I don't know. I guess It's hard though, because like if you do have a bunch of like radical people and they're making claims about the exploited underclass and all that, it's like you can go straight to envy, but they also have substance to the argument. So I think you'd have to have two levels of analysis. Like one you can say actually these people are irrational, insane, self-destructive, this and that. Like you can see the Antifa types. Like you can just see how their own politics has just like destroyed their body, destroyed like their damaged soul is on display. And so you kind of think, okay, well, there's probably some kind of harmful, disordered emotion going on that, and you can say is envy. So but there's also kind of substance to the argument. Like it would be reasonable in the 19th century to see these people living and working 12, 14 or more hours per day for these guys who are super rich. And you'd be thinking there seems to be exploitation going on. Let's have a theory that explains this. This doesn't seem right. And that, frankly, a lot of very intelligent people were some form of socialist, from Jack London, all the way to Engel and Marx. So it's not, it would be a reason, so there could be substance to the argument that would have to be dealt with. But I think there is a sociological analysis you could have that you attribute it all to evil. I think in our own Christian nationalist movement, if it were actually true that we have just a bunch of like incels following us who are, damaged goods in a way, then maybe people would have some kind of point there, perhaps. Of course, that's not actually true. In my experience, people have kids and they're married and all that. But anyway, I don't know. I think.
No.
What's that?
It's important. It was important because when you make a claim that someone has a vice, you have to have proof. Yeah. You can't just declare it.
Yeah.
And you can't just lean on the Bible because the Bible uses this word. Okay. The Bible uses lots of words. And why is this person or this class of people filled with this vice? And could it be something else? Could it be righteous indignation that they've been robbed?
Right.
Legitimately robbed. Like if it was theft or if it was exploitation legitimately, I mean that does happen, right? We can't just say, oh, that's woke stuff. No, exploitation happens. People are exploited. That happens. People are robbed of their wealth. There's confiscation, there's redistribution, and people talk, they openly say this, like we're going to redistribute the land in South Africa from one group to another, openly and explicitly. And so to be upset that good fortune is befalling at the hand of the government through policies, one class taken from another, that's not envy, that's righteous indignation.
Yeah.
That's what that is. And to have to claim that, though, to say it's righteous indignation, you're dealing with facts and arguments, evidence, history, data, and not just pontificating theory from the high seat of your authority or something. And you can't just dismiss large swaths of people by saying that they're full of bitterness or something. They're not those classes of people are not going to go away. That's not going to be overturned because you said something. We have to be exact in our accusations, especially if it's an accusation of sin. And think about it. If you want people to repent of sin, you have to actually prove that the sin is there for them to repent of. You can't just repent of fake sins, or sins that are not fake sins, but sins that aren't being committed. Right? You can't even take a plea deal. This isn't like a civil court where you can say, yeah, I did it, even though you didn't, just to let the charges be lessened and get out of there. And we're dealing with spiritual matters here as well as civil, and we have to be precise and accurate and deal with facts. That's just my main point. Yeah. I wanted to say something too here, Stephen. Another example of envy. I forgot about this. It's a real good one. This is in Tolkien's writings. It's in a book called The Fall of Gondolin. And there's a man. So Gondolin is an elf city, like the high elves in the first age, very illustrious and powerful elves. And there's a man named Tuor. He's a man, not an elf. And one of the angel gods tells Tuor to go to Gondolin and warn the king of that city that they're going to be overthrown. And Tuor is one of the early men. He's very highborn and noble, and he's stately in his bearing and appearance. And so he wanders his way, and he's kind of like a vagabond at this point because a lot of his kinfolk were dead. And he wanders his way into Gondolin, this hidden city, but he's allowed to come in. And he makes his way to the king. He gives the king the warning. Now, all of the elves were impressed with Tuor. In fact, he looked even nobler than they did. He looked godlike to them. But he was a man. So he's like a lesser being than they are, but he looks better than them. And he just has like this aura about him. And there's the princess in Gondolin. Her name was Idril. And Idril instantly fell in love with Tuor. And she just thought he was the stars and the sun to her. And so there's this other guy named Meglin, who was an elf, who loved Idril, but she didn't return his love. And so there's Meglin, this elf, loves Idril. Idril doesn't love him. She loves Tuor, a man. And Tuor walks into the city. It's forbidden for anybody other than elves to come there. He comes. And he walks into the city. He gets the king's favor. He's given a nice suit of armor. He's given part of the palace to live in. And the princess loves him. And the king blesses it. And they get married. Meglin is filled with envy. He's so envious. He's so mad. There's so much rage and anger in his heart because he thinks he should be getting this stuff. He's an elf. He's been here a long time. He's been wooing Idril. Tuor deserves none of this stuff, but now he's just brought in and elevated far above him. And the story goes on. Essentially, Meglin helps with the overthrow of Gondolin. He betrays the entire city. And this, I think, is another part of envy. Envy, it acts to tear down not just what that person is getting, the good, like Catarus and Danglars and the other guy, I forget his name, Fernand did to Edmond Dantes, but you're going to destroy everything and everyone. And that's what Meglin does. The fall of Gondolin, it happens just like this. And the same thing happens with the 300 Spartans who went to fight Xerxes at the Pass of Thermopylae. There was a guy named Ephialtes. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. I have to look in the Greek, but Ephialtes. And he was not of full stature like the soldiers, like the Spartans, but he wanted to fight with the Spartans. He wanted to stand in line, but he couldn't because he couldn't stand upright and hold his shield to protect the man next to him. That's how they fought. He couldn't do that. So he grew envious of the high stature, the greatness of the Spartans that he couldn't achieve. And if you know the story, he ended up betraying the Spartans. This is how the Spartans were defeated. They weren't being defeated by all of Xerxes' men. He sent the 10,000 against them, and the 10,000 were annihilated by the 300. It's an amazing story. They were betrayed by the treacherous Ephialtes. He told Xerxes of a pass. You can come around back and fight the Spartans from two sides. Anyway, these are instances of envy that leads to action to harm that person who is inspiring this envy in you. And it's a really bitter pang in someone, and they can't live with it. And I think one of the best pieces of advice here that I've gotten from the reading that we did in Aristotle and Plutarch, and also from all these examples, is if you feel envy, you should push that into emulation. Stephen, you mentioned emulation at the beginning. You should now move this to emulation. Work to achieve that, or pray to God that circumstances befall you to achieve it. And that's, I think, shows the true nature of envy. Are you really envious? Like when people say today that young men on the right are envious of certain groups of people, is it really envy? Because if it's envy, it can be turned into emulation. Okay? Now, if you don't want to emulate that person, or if you're angry at this person, let's say you have righteous indignation against what is happening, but someone says it's actually envy, well, ask yourself to prove if it's envy or not. Should I emulate the person that I feel towards?
Yeah.
If the answer is no, you're not envious. It's indignation, right? So for an example, let's say I'm expressing anger at someone who owns a really immoral industry, who operates a very immoral industry in America. Okay, let's say they're selling drugs to people that are destroying people's lives across, let's say, Appalachia. And I'm angry at that. And people say, "Oh, you're just envious at these drug pharmaceutical companies. You're just envious at the owners that they have worked harder than you." Like, okay, well, should I emulate them then? Should I work hard and start my own drug company and destroy Appalachia? No, I don't want to do that. Okay, I'm not feeling envious then. Do you see? Go back to Edmond Dantes. Caderousse, Danglars, and Fernand, they did envy Edmond Dantes because they wanted what he had. And if they could emulate him, they would have. Do you see? They wanted what he had. And what he had was not good fortune generally. He had Mercedes. He had the favor of M. Morel, and he was the captain of the Pharaon. And they wanted those things specifically. They didn't just want power or good fortune, like abstractly. I don't want the pharmaceutical industry. Like, I don't want that. Do you see? So I'm not envious of pharmaceutical manufacturers and the people or the specific families that own those things. I'm not envious of that. It's righteous indignation that this is being done to my people across America. Inner cities, wherever they are, people are all drugged up. I don't want to be the one that drugs them up. Do you see? Like, I'm not like, I should be the one killing those people. Like, no, that's not what I'm feeling. That's not what I'm thinking. I would like to see those people healed and off drugs in my country, not flooded with chemicals that destroy them. And I'm angry, righteously, I'm indignant at these people who are doing this. And so that's a good heuristic or way of trying to measure, is it really envy? What if it's not envy? How do we know if it's not envy? As one of our friends asked the question, how do we know it's not envy? What if it's not envy? Well, how do you know? Should you emulate this person? No, it's not envy. Yeah. If you should emulate the person, like if I looked at Michael Jordan or Jimmy Page and I was like, yeah, he doesn't deserve that, I deserve that. Or like Meglin looked at Tuor in The Fall of Gondolin, that's envy, because Meglin wanted what Tuor had. And it wasn't just like good fortune abstractly, it was Idril, the princess. It was the favor of the king, Thorondor, I forgot that, Thorogrand or something, I forget his name. But he had the favor of the king, and he was just stately. I think Meglin, the book says that he was actually a half-breed elf, like part orc or something. So he wasn't as aristocratic looking and godlike in his bearing. So Meglin explicitly and specifically wanted things that Tuor had. He didn't just generally think, good fortune should come to me in its own way. No, he wanted that stuff. Yeah. That's envy.
Yeah, so I think it's absolutely right. If you would not emulate it, if you have some kind of anger, emotion, or whatever towards something, and you would not emulate it, then it's not. Yeah, that's good. I think though that if there are people, you can both emulate. You can say, I would emulate that. Like some people who, if you have indignation towards, people, there could be an element of what they do to achieve what they achieve that is something you should emulate. So if a certain group of people were able to achieve some kind of status, but they use it to ill effect, the way that they went about achieving that status is something you might want to emulate, but to a different effect, right? So if someone was, let's say they achieved, like in a company, they're actually a hard worker, smart, but then they achieve success in the company and become the CEO, but then they use that position to actually for ill effect, perhaps, sort of favoritism of their own, or they steer it towards degeneracy or something like that. There still is something there to emulate. And so I think that's also something to say as well. Like but you're right that it's if it's not something to emulate, then it's not going to be envy. But I think so on emulation, this is something I think that we need to hear more and more. So we hear a lot about envy, and we should look around, and we kind of already do this. We should look around and find these people or these companies or these, ethnic groups or whatever it is, and see they've been successful in this or that way. And again, even if it's come to bad effects, they've still have elements of what they've done that are something you should emulate. And so we should look at them not as we're talking about, but I think there's, lost Thomas for a second there. There he is. I think, so we should seek to say, okay, they've been successful. And instead of saying, we should, destroy them or undermine them, let's say it's a company that has actually done well. What have they done to be successful? Right? We may not like them. We may be neutral toward them or ambivalent. But what have they done to achieve that, and then seek to emulate them? Or just an individual. Look at an individual and say, he has achieved this, he has that. How, and you may not even like the guy, but what can I do to achieve that same level or even exceed what he's done, and see what is commendable about that and emulate that. So I think that maybe this is natural to people. For my own self, as I reflect back, there wasn't a lot of that. And I actually found people to emulate who have been dead a long time. So there hasn't been a lot of like living folks where it's like an academic world or this or that, where I want to kind of emulate that. I guess there has been in a small degree, but I think we should do that more. Like, instead of having this, like, even if we have like righteous indignation towards a person or a group, for the most part, we as individuals or we as groups just don't have the power to say, hey, we can undermine this and we can destroy it because it's going to ill effect. Instead of having that, our action being indignation, that we need to act to undermine or destroy, that might be irrational because you can't achieve the end. Instead, what you should do instead is devote your activity towards emulation so that you can reach or exceed that person or group. Right? Does that make sense? So this is something where I've kind of shifted a bit over the last few years, thinking about, okay, there's this stuff in denominations I don't like. There's stuff in institutions I don't like. Is your activity therefore to try to undermine and destroy? And maybe there's still an element of that as well. Or instead, are you saying, why did this person become, the stated clerk of the PCA, or how did he achieve a success in the denomination? Or how did this company rise up and so now it has a following and is able to achieve what it has? How do you emulate that instead?
I've got a funny example of this. So there's a guy I know, this is years ago. He's not a very good looking guy. He's not a very successful guy, but he's got a beautiful wife. I mean, like, you see it and you're like, this is like the universe has gone wrong here. Like, there's a mismatch. It's the kind of guy you pull aside and you're like, hey man, how'd you do that?
Yeah, right.
What did you do? And guys he actually told me this, because I was married at the point, but it's clear, like, hey, good for you, man. Like, hey, what happened? Did you win the lottery or something? But he actually told me, people ask him that all the time in their own way. They ask him, like, hey man, does she have a sister? Can you like introduce? It's funny, but it just goes to show, I think often a healthy attitude in guys, even when it comes to, it's like business, success, achievement, but also finding a mate, finding a spouse. When you see someone like this guy, let's say he's a 5 and she's like an 8, let's just say, okay? And you see that, instead of getting envious, right, and saying, he doesn't deserve that, I deserve that, like, okay, what? Just go and say, hey man, can you give me some pointers? Like, teach me how to do this. Yeah. And I think that's a healthy attitude in everything, like with finding a spouse, with I know some people, for instance, I just saw them the other day. Their children are so well behaved, and I don't just mean like they obey, but they're thoughtful, they take responsibility, they're happy, they're strong, like they're strong in their mentality and their will and their fortitude, and they're just really good children. Amazing. Now, I mean, you can get pride. Like, a lot of people have very much like family pride in their children, and they won't ever admit faults in there. They're prideful. But I guess you could have envy there or something that like how do they have good? Or you can just ask them, how do you do that? I'd like to learn. Oh, you have chore charts that keep them orderly. You write scripture verses on the wall by the door, and you pray together. Oh, okay, you discipline this way. And now you've turned what could be jealousy or envy or whatever into emulation. Yeah. And it could pay off. So the idea that you too can achieve things in life, and that maybe under God's, I think this is another point we haven't brought up, God's sovereignty. Like, fortune befalls people, but God is sovereign. So if Edmond Dantes has the love of Mercedes and he gets the Pharaon and he gets all this other stuff, well, yes, it's fortune befalling him. Some of it is also his skill, his effort, and also some of it's just God's sovereignty has bestowed this upon him. And I think so, if you look at it from that angle, envy can kind of be a way of being unthankful to God and saying, I'm not. Now, it doesn't mean, I want to quickly qualify this. It doesn't mean that you should just accept whatever befalls you in life as God's sovereignty. Like, oh, well, I guess I'm poor and single because I'm God's sovereign, and like, well, get off the couch. Okay? Get off the couch, learn some skills, struggle, put forth effort, emulate, work. And God rewards that as well. But if you are doing that and someone else is doing that, and he gets a beautiful bride and you get nothing, and life just goes on, and you're like, well, you can look to God as well in this and say, oh, Lord, you blessed my friend, and I'm thankful for that. Please bless me. It's like that meme where that guy says, Lord, Jesus, I've seen what you've done for others, and I want that for myself. Yeah. That's true. There's some truth here. We can pray to God, and I think that will be a way of, like, another mechanism of not allowing envy to surface.
Yeah. And it's also just far more, yeah, that's great. It's also far more rational, like I said before. If your indignation does not have an endpoint, it goes to bitterness, it goes to envy. And so for most people, unless you're super powerful, unless you're the leader of some group where you can act as a group or something like that, for most of us, it's emulation. Even for, even people we don't particularly care for, don't trust, ambiguous towards, or whatever, people that we do respect, it's emulation. And I think that's healthier. It's more rational. It's more productive. And it does lead you out of the trap of bitterness, because it is true, like we said before, that there is a sort of fine line between envy and righteous indignation. You can go from one to the other fairly easily, because the emotions that arise from it are so similar. And the healthiest thing is you can maintain the indignation and yet also act. I mean, that's what emulation is. Basically, you forming similar habits to the person you're emulating, and then from there you can become that sort of person, but perhaps better without the vices. So you can maintain all these things at the same time: indignation towards the effects, and avoiding the sort of things that are bad about another, and yet also say there's something good there I should become. And then you work towards that, and you can achieve your potential through that. If I could, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, along those lines, I'm going back to the Trump family. When I see the Trump family and I see them, the children are all well off, and the grandchildren, I mean, they're all just happy and prosperous. And there can be a part of you or me that says, well, that's just because they all helped their family out, and that's just, they didn't get it on their own. They didn't work hard on their own and make it. And I'm like, well, why should they? Like, why don't I do that with my family? Like, help my family. In other words, Why don't I emulate them clearly it works and it's not immoral. Again, that's the whole thing with envy. If you're willing to emulate them and there are no barriers to doing so, then you should stop envying and you should do it. But if there are barriers to emulating them, then it may be not envy to begin with. Like if the Trump family had gotten their wealth, I guess we'll look at the Biden family, for instance. Joe Biden pardoned his son. I forget the guy's name now, but he's clearly doing drugs and embezzling and all kinds of funds and manipulating whole countries. I don't even know what's going on. And then Joe Biden just pardons his son for like everything. It's ridiculous. And I think that's, part of me I could see like, maybe is that envy that I'm jealous of that? Like, well, okay, do I want to do what they're doing? Do I want what they have? Do I want my son to go do lots of drugs with hookers in Ukraine and destroy countries and stuff? No. Okay, it's not envy. Am I going to emulate Joe Biden in any way? No, it's not envy. So with Trump and his family, they're not perfect, okay? I'm just talking about their wealth. How did they get their wealth? Through doing business, through building stuff. That doesn't seem to be too bad. Now, I could be envious of that, or I could just say, I'm going to find ways in my life to benefit my family, and I'm not going to have any shame or guilt. Like there's no tribal, kinist, ethnic vainglory guilt with that. Like, no, this is actually a good thing to do. I'm going to do it. I'm going to emulate that aspect of what I see here. It's good, and it should happen. And I think there are other groups in America, ethnic groups or whatever, to just act more as a group than typically me and people like me tend to do. And I think, hey, that works for them. That's actually, like, individualism isn't what they're doing, but what they're doing works. Maybe we should learn a little bit here and take what good we can and implement it for our program, for our group, for our tribe or whatever. And so it doesn't have to be envy. You can turn whatever might be envy into emulation and act on it in a productive way.
Yeah. Yeah. And most of us, I mean, this is true for most of history, but I think even in liberalism, especially modern liberalism, each kind of irrationally feel that we're powerful. We can say something on Facebook or Twitter or something like that, and we can feel like we're actually doing something when we're politically actually, I mean, nothing ever happens, right? We can have very strong opinions. We can shout at the radio or shout at Fox News or whatever and get excited about this and that. But either we're not really doing anything, like nothing ever happens. And so you can be indignant your whole life and never achieve a thing. And so you just have to, the primary, well, I mean, yeah, let your indignation, let your anger, whatever it is, let it spur you on in order to emulate the good, and the good you see in others. I think another thing I wanted to mention was emulation. This is where there is a sort of vice associated with it. It's not in itself a vice, but you see this with a lot of boomers will say, well, you just need to work harder. You just need to work harder. Look at the Chinese immigrant working 20 hours a day at their Chinese restaurant. Right. Look at the Indian who works 16 hours a day at their tech job. And, right. they live in this and that. And you're like, why don't you just emulate that? And so I think there is a sort of limit to that. And this goes back to immigration. This goes back to a conception of a way of life. The American way of life is that you do work hard, but there is, let's just say, a work-life balance. I know people hate that term, but there is a recognition that life is
self-care.
More. Yeah, there's more to it than you working a job for 10, 12 hours, 14 hours a day. And by the way, most of those people are not actually working for 14 hours. But anyway, there's more to it than that. So the question, I think we also have to avoid on the other side this thing of, okay, you're not bitter, okay, you're not envious, but why are you emulating the guy working 15 hours a day? So that's a problem. That's where we have to avoid that trap as well and say, no, sorry, our way of life is that we actually enjoy our Saturdays, that we actually do have an evening with our family, that we do get some sleep and we enjoy perhaps the richer things of life, of the liberal arts and other things. So, so that's what we should emulate, I think, the American way of life, and not say, hey, this guy's successful because he worked so long and neglected his families and kids and all that sort of thing. So, so that's what I want to say. Yeah. What else you got?
I think that's it. The big thing for me is whenever I hear people say your envy, it strikes at the heart of the pious, sensitive Christian, because it's a biblical term and it's a sin. The Bible never says God is envious. It says he's jealous, says he's full of wrath and indignation, but we're never to be envious. God is never envious. So it's like people who wield that term, they're getting like at your hindbrain. They're going behind your reason to something deeper. It's like pre-rational psychoanalytic accusation. And you really have to put up some like serious barriers before that accusation comes home. Am I really envious? Well, how do I know? Is this person a peer of mine or near peer? If no, out. Is this person in their position due to bad things that they did? If so, the accusation's out. This is righteous indignation, right? What is the proof of envy? What are the logical or rational or factual arguments here? If there are none, dismiss it. If the accusation of envy merely fits into like a theological schema, let's say an eschatological scheme, well, then it's theory. It's abstract theory. It's deductive. It's not inductive. It's not evidential. And it needs to be that when you're dealing with people. Like we can say a bunch of socialists are driven by envy because envy is written into the fabric of their political philosophy. And so another way of looking at this is it envy or not? Well, do I want to emulate that person? And if not, then this isn't envy, right? If not, this isn't envy, because I don't want what they have. And it's not like you can't just abstract it, like again with the drug company. Well, they're successful and I want success. No. They own drugs and they're destroying people. I don't want to own drug companies and destroy people, and I think it's evil, and I'm righteously indignant. That's not envy. Do you see? I don't want to emulate that. And if I see somebody like my friend long ago who what's the equivalent of calling like you call women mid? Sometimes people say that. What's the equivalent of a guy being a mid? I don't know. He's just average guy. He's an average guy. Yeah. And he's got this wife that's clearly like out of his league. Now, the envy can grow there. You can look at that and say, well, but no, I'm going to achieve this as well. Or you can just say like at the time, like, I'm married. I'm just happy for him. Like, hey, good for you. That's healthy. That's actually, if you don't want to emulate, but not be envious, be happy for that person. Like, hey, God bless you, man. Praise God. You got a wonderful family. That's great. But so there are ways to check this, right? There are ways to put in checks of, is this person providing evidence? Is this person providing some reasons? Or are they just using it as like you said, Stephen, earlier, a rhetorical tool to get behind actually having to argue and deal with reality and evidence? And put these checks in place.
Yeah, and I would say too that realize that I'm going to sound like James Lindsay, but there's an action reaction element here, and the reaction is the point.
Oh, so woke mid. That's what I'm hearing.
I mean, this is not original to him, but it's true though. Someone is going to say you're envious, and then everyone reacts and they're mad, and the reaction's the point. So that's another thing to realize. That's how. Oh, okay. That's how in today's climate, and I've done some of this myself, is that you say something, and what you say is not so much the point; it's the reaction that others give to it. That is the political action itself that aids you. So this happens a lot with frankly, women online. Is you say something and they lose their minds, and when you do that. everyone observes it and says, wow, they just lost their mind. Now it's funny. Now we can make jokes, and the reaction's the point. So I think that's a really important thing to understand.
So what you're saying is some people accuse others of sins like envy, and the point isn't to actually provide an accurate assessment of these people. It's to cause them to react in a negative way, and then use that to say, look, these people it must have hit home because they're angry. I upset a lot of people with this tweet, and they say that kind of thing. So it's
well, and then you look like, on Twitter, you go down and you see different people saying like, shut up, Rabbi, or whatever like that. And so people react, and then someone can say, look at the reaction I got. And wow, I must have, what is it? What's that line? Toss meat to the dogs or something. Well, I can't remember what the line is, but something along those lines. And then they just point out, look, these people are insane. Look, they do have unbridled emotions. And so it's the reaction is the point. So I would just keep that in mind, that in a way you could be played. Like, it's false, and you just have to, if you're going to respond at all, you have to respond knowing that your reaction is the point. So,
okay.
The other thing is, so I guess we end on this, and this just kind of summarizes my thoughts on emulation, is that we need to, particularly among like the Christian New Right, what we need to do is realize that indignation's good. Acting to correct injustice is good. Acting for the good of, your people and community is good. But none of that's going to happen simply by expressing that indignation online. It's going to happen by you emulating those who have achieved some good in some capacity. Even if it's your enemies, oftentimes your enemies have done something that in itself is fine, but just done to bad effects. And so we should think more upon that, and every time you see the word envy, just think emulation. Maybe that's the point of this video. Now, it'll redirect people to, hey, I need to start building the habits of mind, of body, of soul that will put me or my friends in a position to actually correct the injustice. So again, you can have a lot of words, but you have the deeds, and you can't have deeds unless you've emulated the best or the best aspects of people. So that's what I would just kind of leave it off as with here. And any final thoughts you got?
Nope, no final thoughts.
No, that's it? Okay.
Yep. All
right. Well, thanks for listening to us for this episode of The Lone Bulwark. And subscribe at Supercast, The Lone Bulwark. .supercast.com for ad-free on this, and then you got the Ars Politica show, you have the Scholars series, and that's it. Maybe more to come though. So all right, thank you. See you guys later.